My mother arrived at my wedding in a simple silver dress and low heels. My in-laws thought she was nobody. So when my mother-in-law called her trash into a live microphone in front of 500 guests, I ended the wedding before dinner was even served. 10 minutes later, they found out my mother owned the company that was about to make them rich. My name is Julian Reed. I was 34 years old on the day I almost married Caroline Whitlock, and for a long time, I thought being chosen by her family meant I had finally stepped into a better life. The Whitlocks were not famous in the way actors are famous, but in Seattle business circles, their name carried weight. Her father, Grant Whitlock, owned Whitlock Urban Development. His company built luxury towers, private medical centers, resort communities, and those glass and steel neighborhoods where the coffee costs $9 and every lobby smells like expensive wood. Her mother, Vivian Whitlock, did not have an official title at the company, but everyone knew she controlled the family. Grant controlled contracts. Vivian controlled people. Caroline was their only daughter. Beautiful, calm, polished, and raised in a world where nobody ever said no to her unless they were rich enough to survive it. When I met her, I thought she was different from them. That was my first mistake. People from cruel families can still be kind when nothing is at stake. The real test comes when they have to choose between you and the family that trained them. Caroline and I met at a fundraiser for a children's hospital expansion. I was there because my engineering firm had helped with one of the early site studies. She was there because the Whitlock Foundation had paid for half the champagne and needed photographs to prove it. I was standing near a scale model of the new surgical wing, staring at a tiny plastic ambulance that someone had placed in the wrong lane. Caroline walked up beside me and said, "You look offended by the architecture." "I'm offended by the traffic flow," I said. She laughed. For the next hour, we talked like we had known each other longer than 60 minutes. She asked about my work. She asked about my mother. She asked why I became an engineer. I told her the truth. I liked building things that worked. She smiled and said, "That's rare." For the first 6 months, Caroline made me feel seen. Not judged. Not measured. Seen. And because I wanted that feeling to be real, I ignored every warning that came after. My mother noticed how happy I was before I said Caroline's name. That was my mother's gift. She could read a room. A pause, a voice, a son pretending not to check his phone every 2 minutes. Her name was Marianne Reed. To most people, she looked ordinary. That was not an insult. It was a choice. She wore simple cardigans, soft trousers, small gold earrings, and the same brown leather handbag for years because, as she liked to say, "It still works, Julian." She drove a silver Subaru with a dent near the left taillight. She kept grocery coupons in a ceramic bowl by the door. She made soup when it rained. If you met her at the grocery store, you would think she was a retired office manager, a church volunteer, or the kind of woman who knew which neighbor had just had surgery. You would not think she owned one of the largest private logistics and materials companies on the West Coast. That was also by design. My mother founded Marlowe Strategic Materials when I was 9 years old. Back then, I did not understand what that meant. To me, it was just the reason she was always on the phone in the laundry room, speaking calmly about shipping delays, industrial suppliers, port access, hospital contracts, and government deadlines while folding towels. She built the company quietly. No magazine covers. No private jets posted online. No speeches about being a visionary. Marlowe supplied specialty materials, emergency infrastructure, medical facility equipment, and logistics support for hospitals, ports, energy projects, and government buildings. It was the kind of company ordinary people never heard about, but powerful people needed when they wanted things built on time. By the time I was in college, Marlowe was worth more than some public companies people bragged about owning stock in. My mother still clipped coupons. When I asked her why she never told people who she really was, she always gave me the same answer. "I'm not hiding anything, Julian. I just don't need strangers to clap every time I enter a room." When I was younger, I thought that was modesty. After my wedding day, I understood it was protection. Caroline met my mother 3 months after we started dating. I brought her to the house where I grew up, a modest 2-story place in Tacoma with blue shutters, old maple trees in the front yard, and a kitchen table scarred from 20 years of homework, tax folders, birthday candles, and late-night conversations. My mother made lemon chicken. Caroline brought wine that cost more than the meal. They were polite to each other. That is the best I can honestly say. My mother asked Caroline about her work with the Whitlock Foundation. Caroline gave clean, practiced answers. Caroline asked my mother what she did, and my mother said, "I run a supply company." That was true. It was also like calling the ocean a large puddle. Caroline smiled and said, "That must keep you busy." "It does," my mother said. Then she asked Caroline to pass the salad. After dinner, Caroline told me my mother was sweet. Sweet. Not sharp. Not interesting. Not impressive. Sweet. I remember that because it bothered me, but not enough. A lot of people notice disrespect early. We just rename it because we are not ready to lose the person attached to it. Caroline's parents were worse. The first time I met Grant and Vivian Whitlock, it was at their house on Mercer Island. The word house feels too small for it. It had gates, water views, glass walls, and the cold perfection of a place designed to be photographed more than lived in. Vivian greeted me first. She kissed the air near my cheek and looked over my shoulder, as if checking whether I had brought anyone more important with me. "Julian," she said, "Caroline has told us so little." That was the first warning. Grant shook my hand and squeezed too hard. That was the second. Dinner was served on plates that looked too delicate to hold food. Vivian asked where I had gone to school, what my salary range was, whether I owned or rented, and whether my mother still lived in Tacoma. Still, as if Tacoma were a condition people recovered from, I answered everything calmly. I told myself they were protective. I told myself wealthy people were just direct. I told myself a lot of things that let me stay at that table. Then Vivian asked about my father. "He passed when I was 11, I said. Her face softened for half a second. "Not from kindness. From calculation? And your mother raised you alone?" "Yes." "How admirable." There are ways to say admirable that mean unfortunate. Vivian was fluent in all of them. Grant asked what my mother did. "She owns a supply company," I said. His fork paused. "What kind of supply company?" "Industrial materials, logistics, infrastructure support." He nodded, but I could see him lose interest before I finished. To him, supply company meant warehouses, trucks, work boots, invoices, and people who waited outside conference rooms. Useful, not prestigious. Caroline touched my hand under the table. I thought it was comfort. Later, I realized it was warning. On the drive home, I said, "Your mother doesn't like me." Caroline sighed. "She doesn't dislike you. That's not the same thing. She just has a particular way of thinking about family." She asked whether my mother still lives in Tacoma, like she was asking whether she still had a disease. Caroline was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "You're reading too much into it." That was the first time I saw the line between us. Not the last. Over the next year, the Whitlocks learned how to insult my mother without saying anything they could be punished for. Vivian once introduced her at a charity brunch by saying, "This is Julian's mother, Marianne. She runs a little materials business. Very hands-on." Little. Hands-on. My mother smiled and said, "Nice to meet you." At an engagement dinner, Grant asked if my mother would be comfortable attending a wedding with that many formal guests. My mother said, "I've sat through federal procurement hearings, Grant. I can survive chicken and speeches." He laughed because he thought she was joking. She was not. Caroline rarely defended her. That was the part one kept trying not to see. When Vivian made little comments, Caroline changed the subject. When Grant dismissed my mother's work, Caroline squeezed my knee. When Caroline's brother Preston called my mother the warehouse queen after 2 drinks, Caroline said, "Preston, don't be gross," in the same tone someone uses when a dog steals a napkin. Not angry, embarrassed. Mostly because I had heard it. 4 months before the wedding, I finally said something. Caroline and I were in my apartment, sitting on the floor between boxes of invitation samples Vivian had rejected because the paper felt cheap. I said, "Your family looks down on my mother." Caroline did not pretend not to understand. That almost made it worse. "They don't know her," she said. "They don't try to. They're old-fashioned." "No, they're rude." She looked at me then, really looked, and I thought maybe we were finally going to have the conversation we needed. Instead, she said, "After the wedding, things will settle." Why would they settle? Because we'll be family. That answer sounded hopeful. It was actually dangerous. Because to Caroline, becoming family meant I would stop being allowed to object. Around the same time, the Whitlocks were chasing the biggest deal of their lives. Grant did not tell me the details at first. Men like Grant love talking about success, but only after it is safe enough to present as inevitable. I heard pieces. A waterfront redevelopment in Everett, medical research buildings, luxury residences, a private hospital wing, a logistics hub tied to a new port expansion. Billions over 10 years if everything went right. Whitlock Urban Development had investors lined up, political support, renderings, architects, lobbyists, and a room full of people willing to call it visionary. What they did not have was the partner required to make the project real. They needed guaranteed materials, port access, emergency procurement, warehousing, and logistics support. In simple terms, they needed a company powerful enough to move impossible things quickly. They needed Marlowe Strategic Materials, my mother's company. At the time, I did not know the Whitlocks needed Marlowe. I knew my mother owned Marlowe, obviously, but I did not know the internal name of Grant's project. I did not know he had spent almost 2 years trying to get a private meeting with Marlowe's owner. I did not know Vivian had been telling friends that once the Marlowe partnership was signed, Whitlock would become untouchable. My mother knew. She knew before I proposed. She did not tell me. That hurt later until I understood why. She wanted to see who they were when they thought she was nobody. And they were very eager to show her. I proposed to Caroline on a cold February morning at Cary Park, with Seattle below us and my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the ring. She said yes before I finished asking. For one perfect minute, nothing else mattered. Then the wedding planning began, and the Whitlocks swallowed it whole. Vivian chose the venue. Vivian chose the florist. Vivian chose the photographer, the guest list, the seating chart, the string quartet, the dinner menu, and the shade of ivory she insisted was not cream. My mother offered to help twice. Both times Vivian said, "Oh, that's sweet, Marianne. We have it handled." Sweet again. My mother smiled. I watched her smile and felt something harden inside me. 3 weeks before the wedding, I found out where they had seated her. Table 19, behind a floral column, near the service doors. I saw the draft seating chart on Caroline's laptop while she was in the shower. My mother's name was there in tiny black font, tucked between a retired dental hygienist and one of Grant's subcontractors. Caroline's parents were at the head table. Grant's golfing friends had better seats than my mother. I waited until Caroline came out. "Why is my mother at table 19? She froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. "My mom did the chart," she said. "And you approved it." "It's complicated." "No, it isn't. She thought your mom might be more comfortable with people who are more..." She stopped. I stood up. "More what?" Caroline looked tired. "Julian, say it. She thought your mother might feel out of place at the front." There it was, wrapped in concern, smelling exactly like shame. I told Caroline that if my mother was not seated with the family, there would be no wedding. She cried, not because my mother had been insulted, because I had made the wedding difficult. The next day, the seating chart changed. My mother was moved to the second row for the ceremony and a family table near the front for the reception. Caroline told me I had embarrassed her with her mother. I told her I could live with that. I wish that had been enough. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private club downtown, the kind with dark wood, oil paintings, and men who still thought women should laugh at stories that were not funny. My mother wore a navy dress and a pearl pin my father had given her before he died. She looked elegant, simple, and completely herself. Vivian looked at her and smiled. "Marianne," she said, "you clean up beautifully." My hand tightened around my glass. My mother touched my wrist. "Not here." She did not say it. She did not have to. Grant gave a speech that night. He spoke about Caroline's childhood, family values, legacy, and building something that lasts. He welcomed me into the Whitlock family with the warmth of a man signing an acquisition he believed would benefit him. Then he looked toward my mother. And of course, we welcomed Marianne as well. A woman who clearly worked hard to give Julian every opportunity she could. Worked hard. Every opportunity she could. The room applauded politely. My mother lifted her glass. I wanted to leave then. I nearly did. But Caroline reached for my hand, and for the last time, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That night, I called my mother from my hotel room. She was staying 2 floors below me. "Are you okay?" I asked. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I am not the person who needs to be okay tomorrow." What does that mean? It means weddings reveal more than marriages do. I sat on the edge of the bed. "Mom?" "Yes?" "If they disrespect you tomorrow, I'm done." She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "Then be done for the right reason." What's the right reason? Not because I need defending. Be done because you finally believe what they have been showing you. I slept badly. The wedding was at the Belmont Grand Hotel, a historic building with chandeliers, marble floors, and a ballroom big enough to make 500 guests feel like an intimate gathering, if everyone involved was rich enough. My mother arrived in a simple silver dress with sleeves, low heels, and the pearl pin. She looked beautiful. Not flashy. Not expensive in a way Vivian would respect. Beautiful. I met her near the entrance to the groom's suite. She adjusted my tie with hands that had signed contracts worth more than the hotel we were standing in. "You look nervous," she said. "I am nervous." "That means you are awake." "That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be." She smiled. For a moment, I was 7 years old again, standing in the kitchen with a scraped knee while she told me pain was information, not an emergency. Then a hotel coordinator came to collect me. The ceremony itself went perfectly. That is the strange part. Caroline looked stunning. Grant walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Vivian dabbed at her cheek with a lace handkerchief. My mother sat in the second row, straight-backed and calm. When Caroline and I exchanged vows, her voice trembled. I wanted to believe that meant something. I really did. At the reception, I tried to relax. For almost an hour, I managed. The ballroom glowed with gold light. Glasses chimed. People laughed. Caroline's friends danced before the first chorus had even been cleared. My mother sat at the family table, speaking quietly with an older man in a charcoal suit I did not recognize. He seemed to know her. That should have registered. It did not. I was too busy trying to convince myself the worst was behind us. Then Vivian took the microphone. She stood at the center of the dance floor, under a chandelier, wearing a champagne-colored gown and the expression of a woman who had never once doubted her right to be heard. "Before we begin dinner," she said, "I want to say a few words." Caroline stiffened beside me. I looked at her. "What is this?" She shook her head. "I don't know." I think she meant it. Vivian spoke beautifully at first. She talked about Caroline as a child, about love, about families joining together, about how marriage was not only between two people, but between two worlds. Two worlds. I felt my mother's gaze from across the room before I turned to look. She was watching Vivian without expression. Then Vivian smiled. "I will admit," she said, "when Caroline first brought Julian home, I wondered whether the Reed family would understand the kind of life our daughter was born into." A few people laughed lightly, not because it was funny, because wealth teaches people to laugh before they know whether they should. Vivian continued. "Julian is hardworking, sincere, and very devoted to his mother. Marianne clearly did her best with what she had." My mother did not move. My chest went cold. Vivian glanced toward her friend, a woman in emerald silk who had been drinking champagne since cocktail hour. The friend smirked. Vivian tilted the microphone slightly, but not away from her mouth. Maybe she meant for everyone to hear. Maybe she had simply gotten careless. Either way, the words carried across the ballroom. That woman is not family. She is trash that dressed up for dinner. The room changed. It was not silence at first. It was confusion. A few sharp laughs. A gasp near the front. Someone dropped a fork. The string quartet stopped halfway through a note. I turned to Caroline. She was staring down at her lap. Then she did the smallest thing. The smallest. She pressed her lips together, as if she were trying not to smile. It was not a full smile. It was worse. It was relief. Relief that her mother had finally said out loud what Caroline had spent a year pretending not to hear. That was enough. I stood. The chair scraped loudly behind me. 500 people turned. Vivian still held the microphone. Her face had gone pale, but not from regret. From the sudden realization that she had said the private thing publicly. I walked across the dance floor. Caroline whispered my name behind me. I did not stop. When I reached Vivian, I held out my hand. She looked at it. Julian, she said softly, this is not the time. You made it the time. For a second, I thought she would refuse. Then Grant stood behind her and muttered, give him the mic. She handed it to me. I turned to face the room. My mother was sitting very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was calm, but I knew her well enough to see what it cost her. I looked at her first, then at Caroline, then at the guests. I want to thank everyone for coming, I said. My voice did not shake. That surprised me. This wedding is over. A wave moved through the ballroom. Not sound exactly. Motion. People turning to each other. Mouths opening. Eyes widening. Grant stepped forward. Julian, don't be ridiculous. I looked at him. Your wife just called my mother trash into a microphone. Vivian's face tightened. I was emotional. No, I said. You were comfortable. That landed harder than shouting would have. I turned to Caroline. Months ago, I asked you what you would do if your family crossed this line. Tears filled her eyes. Julian, please. You said you would handle it. I didn't know she would say that. But you knew she thought it. Caroline did not answer. I nodded once. That was the end of it. Not the paperwork. Not the venue. Not the embarrassment. The marriage ended in that nod. I set the microphone down on the nearest table. Then I walked to my mother. She stood before I reached her. Come on, I said. Her eyes searched mine. Not worried. Measuring, you're sure? I looked back once. At Caroline crying now. At Vivian, frozen under the chandelier. At Grant, calculating the damage. At 500 people waiting to see whether dignity could be negotiated. I'm sure. My mother took my arm. We walked out of the ballroom together. No music. No applause. Just footsteps on marble and the low sound of a room realizing it had witnessed something nobody could smooth over with champagne. We were halfway down the hallway when the older man in the charcoal suit caught up with us. Marianne. My mother turned. The man looked embarrassed, but not surprised. I am sorry, he said. I should have said something sooner. My mother's expression softened. You didn't owe me that, Daniel. He looked at me. I don't think we've met. Daniel Cho. I'm general counsel for Whitlock Urban Development. Grant's company. Daniel looked from me to my mother, then back again. I had no idea Julian was your son. I frowned. My mother's? Daniel hesitated. My mother sighed. Not here, but Daniel had already said enough. From behind us came another voice. Mrs. Reed? Grant Whitlock was walking quickly down the hall, Vivian behind him, Caroline trailing several steps back in her wedding dress. Grant's face had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something rawer. Fear. Daniel Cho looked like a man who suddenly wished he had chosen another hallway. Grant stopped a few feet from my mother. Marianne, he said. Not Mrs. Reed, not Julian's mother. Marianne. I think there may have been a misunderstanding. My mother looked at him. A misunderstanding? Vivian stepped forward. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. What I said was unforgivable, she said. I was overwhelmed. Weddings are emotional. I never meant... Yes, you did, my mother said. The hallway went quiet. Vivian's mouth closed. My mother's voice remained calm. That is what makes this simple. Grant glanced at Daniel, then back to my mother. Marianne, please. We have business on the table. That was when I understood something was happening far beyond my canceled wedding. My mother looked at Daniel. You didn't tell them? Daniel swallowed. I wasn't authorized to disclose ownership structure. Grant's face twitched. I knew Marlowe had a private owner. I didn't know that the trash in the silver dress owned it, my mother asked. No one spoke. My body went cold. I looked at her. Mom? She turned to me, and for the first time all day, she looked tired. I own Marlowe Strategic Materials, she said. All of it. I stared at her. Of course I knew she owned the company. But the way Grant reacted told me this was not just about wealth. This was about need. Grant took a breath. Marianne, the Everett project is extremely important to both our companies. No, my mother said. It is important to yours. His face tightened. Marlowe's participation would benefit from the scale. Marlowe has scale. Daniel looked at the floor. Vivian's face had lost all color. Caroline stood behind them, crying silently. I looked between all of them. What project? My mother answered without looking away from Grant. Whitlock Urban Development has been seeking a 10-year strategic supply and logistics agreement with Marlowe. Without Marlowe, their Everett project loses its materials, logistics, emergency supply guarantees, and, most likely, half its investors. Grant said, there are other partners. Daniel said nothing. That silence answered for him. My mother finally looked at Grant fully. You were asking my company to carry the spine of your project while your wife called me trash in front of 500 people? Grant's jaw worked. Marianne, I apologize. No, she said. You calculate. He flinched. My mother opened her handbag and took out her phone. She tapped the screen twice. Then she looked at Daniel Cho. Please notify your team that Marlowe is withdrawing from all current negotiations with Whitlock Urban Development, effective immediately. Vivian made a small sound. Grant stepped forward. Let's not be hasty. My mother looked at him. I have been watching your family for 14 months. Nothing about this is hasty. Caroline finally spoke. Mrs. Reed, please. My mother turned to her. Caroline looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I'm sorry, she said. I should have stopped it. Yes, my mother said. You should have. Caroline covered her mouth. I wanted to feel something clean. Triumph, maybe. I did not. I felt the strange grief of learning that the person you loved had failed a test you were begging them to pass. Grant's phone started ringing. Then Daniel's. Then Vivian's. News travels quickly when money is bleeding. Inside the ballroom, people had begun to learn the shape of the disaster. Someone had recognized Daniel Cho leaving. Someone else had searched Marlowe Strategic Materials. Someone else had found an old industry profile mentioning a private owner named Marianne Reed, though there were no photographs. By the time Grant looked back toward the ballroom doors, the guests were no longer whispering about a rude toast. They were whispering about a collapsed deal. Grant answered his phone. He listened for 5 seconds. His face changed. No, he said. No, do not release anything. I said do not. He walked away, still talking. Vivienne stood alone. Without the microphone, without the room, without certainty, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman who had mistaken cruelty for class for so long she had forgotten the difference. My mother did not look at her again. She touched my arm. Let's go. This time we did. The hotel valet brought my mother's Subaru to the entrance. That almost made me laugh. Behind us, through the glass doors, bankers, developers, donors, and social climbers were checking their phones beneath chandeliers Vivian had chosen for photographs that would never be posted. My mother got into the passenger seat. I drove. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "You knew." She looked out the window. Yes. You knew they needed your company. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. I gripped the steering wheel. Why? She turned to me then. Because if I told you, their behavior would become about money. I needed you to see that it was about character. I hated that answer. Mostly because it was right. You let them treat you like that. I let them reveal themselves. You should have told me. Maybe, she said. But would you have left because they insulted your mother or because they insulted someone powerful? I had no answer. She looked back out the window. I needed you to know the difference. Caroline called me 17 times that night. I did not answer. At 2 a.m, she sent a message. I love you. I made a mistake. Please don't let my mother destroy us. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, she didn't destroy us. She revealed us. I turned off my phone. The next morning, the official statement went out. Marlowe Strategic Materials had ended exploratory negotiations with Whitlock Urban Development regarding the Everett Harbor redevelopment project. No reason was given. No reason was needed. Within 48 hours, 2 investors paused their commitments. By the end of the week, a bank requested updated risk disclosures. The city delayed a planning session. A private equity group that had been circling the project stepped back, pending supplier clarity. That phrase became my favorite. Supplier clarity. It sounded so clean, so bloodless, so unlike the sound of Vivian's voice calling my mother trash under a chandelier. Grant tried to reach my mother through Daniel Cho, then through a board member, then through someone he knew at a charity, then, finally, through me. His message was short. Julian, we need to talk. Families have disagreements. Business should not be emotional. I showed it to my mother. She read it and handed the phone back. Business is always emotional when people lose leverage. That was all she said. Caroline came to see me 3 days later. I was at my apartment, surrounded by wedding gifts I had not opened and did not want. She arrived in jeans, no makeup, hair tied back, looking more like the woman I had fallen in love with than she had on our wedding day. For one dangerous second, I missed her. Then I remembered her smile. She stood in my doorway. Can I come in? I let her. She looked around at the boxes. I'm sorry, she said. I nodded. I believe you. Her face lifted slightly. But I'm not marrying you. The hope disappeared. Julian, I gave you so many chances to stand beside me before it cost you anything. Tears filled her eyes. I was afraid of them. I know. That should matter. It does, I said. It explains you. It doesn't excuse you. She sat on the edge of my couch. My mother has controlled everything my whole life. My clothes, my schools, my friends, my career, the wedding. I thought if I kept everyone calm long enough, we could have our own life afterward. That was the plan? Let them humiliate my mother until the honeymoon? She flinched. I didn't think it would go that far. You knew where it was going. You just hoped it would stop before you had to choose. She cried then. Really cried. Not elegantly. Not with intact mascara and careful breathing. Like someone realizing too late that love is not a shelter if you use it to hide from courage. I sat across from her. I did not comfort her. That may sound cruel. It was not. Comfort would have been a lie. She wiped her face. Do you hate me? No. That answer hurt her too, because hate would have meant there was still fire. There was not. I hope you get away from them, I said. For your own sake. She looked at me like that was worse than anger. Maybe it was. The Whitlocks did not collapse overnight. Families like that rarely do. They cracked in expensive ways. The Everett project never recovered. Without Marlowe, every replacement partner wanted more money, less liability, and longer timelines. Investors hate uncertainty, and the Whitlocks had become uncertainty in a tailored suit. Grant stepped down as CEO 9 months later after the board insisted on fresh strategic leadership. Vivian resigned from 2 foundation committees within the same year. Officially, she wanted to spend more time with family. Unofficially, people stopped inviting her to rooms where kindness was considered a safer investment than cruelty. Preston Whitlock tried to joke at a private dinner that my mother had overreacted. The joke did not land. People had become nervous about laughing with the Whitlocks. That was the true punishment. Not poverty. Not total ruin. Silence. The sudden absence of people willing to laugh when they were cruel. As for my mother, she changed almost nothing. She kept the Subaru. She kept the house. She kept the ceramic bowl of coupons by the door, even though I once told her it was becoming a psychological weapon against me. She laughed at that. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, I went to her house for Sunday dinner. She made roast chicken, green beans, and the potatoes she knew I liked too much. After dinner, we sat at the kitchen table while rain tapped against the window. I asked her if she regretted withdrawing from the deal. She looked genuinely confused. Why would I? It was a lot of money. I have a lot of money. I laughed. She smiled, but only a little. Then she said, there are people who cost too much, even when the contract is profitable. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Caroline, about Vivian, about Grant, about the way I kept trying to buy peace with pieces of myself. My mother stood to make tea. I watched her move around the kitchen. This woman people had mistaken for small because she did not need to make herself large. She had built an empire and still knew which mug was my favorite. That was power. Not the ballroom. Not the chandelier. Not the microphone. Not 500 people waiting to see whether I would swallow the insult to keep the wedding alive. Power was knowing exactly who you were before anyone else found out. A year later, I moved to San Diego for a job I should have taken before the engagement. Better role, better team, better life. My mother helped me pack. She labeled every box in handwriting so neat it felt like criticism. On the last night before I left, she handed me an envelope. I stared at it. What is this? A boring legal document. Mom? A trust structure. Some Marlowe shares. A few things that will make your accountant excited and you uncomfortable. I put it on the table. I don't want money because I defended you. She looked at me sharply. I am not paying you for being my son. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. She sat across from me. This is not a reward. It is responsibility. There is a difference. I opened the envelope later that night. I will not tell you the number. Not because it is a secret. Because the number is not the point. The point is that I had almost married into a family that would have respected my mother if they'd seen that number first. And I walked away before they did. That is the only part of this story I am proud of without complication. Not the canceled wedding. Not the collapsed deal. Not Vivian's humiliation or Grant's panic or the way people whispered when they realized the woman they had dismissed owned the company they needed most. Those things were satisfying in the way justice sometimes is. But they were not the point. The point was my mother sitting near the front of a ballroom in a silver dress, being called trash by people who thought dignity had a price. The point was that I heard it. The point was that Caroline heard it too. And the point was that only one of us stood up. I do not know where Caroline is now. I heard she moved to Chicago. I heard she no longer works for her family's foundation. I heard she cut her hair short and started using her middle name. I hope that means she's becoming someone who can choose herself before someone else chooses for her. I wish her well. I mean that. But I do not miss her. I miss who I thought she was. That is different. Sometimes when I visit my mother, I still see the pearl pin on her dresser. The one she wore to my wedding? The one she wore when Vivian called her trash. The one she wore when she ended a $1 billion negotiation with 2 taps on her phone. I asked her once why she kept it out. She said, "It reminds me that cheap people often stand under expensive lights." That is my mother. Quiet, precise, devastating when necessary. If there is one thing I learned from all of this, it is not that rich people can be cruel. Anyone can be cruel. It is not that poor-looking people may secretly own empires. That makes a good story, but it is still the shallow lesson. The real lesson is this. You should not need proof of someone's power before you decide they deserve respect. My mother deserved respect when they thought she ran a small supply company. She deserved respect when they thought she lived in a modest house in Tacoma. She deserved respect when she arrived in a simple silver dress, with low heels and a pearl pin. She deserved respect before the name Marlowe meant anything to them. And if they could not see that until their money depended on it, then they never respected her at all. They respected leverage. I almost married into that. Then my mother gave me one last lesson without raising her voice. She let them speak. She let me choose. And when I did, she took my arm and walked out with me. Everything after that was just the bill coming due.